Okay. So we have a Mishnah that says, you have to say if you come from overseas. Last time we talked about whether you come from Eretz Yisrael, within Eretz Yisrael, and the issue of Aliyah Regel, and right, it says because there were more Alei Regalim or more Batei Din, etc. And the Gemara is going through all sorts of the different parameters of when you say B'fanei you have to say it only from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. Also Molich or Movi, we saw different explanations of that. Within the context of why say B'fanei Nechtam, so we saw Rav and Rabba, right, Lishma or in Mitzuin Lakaimo. And one thing we didn't address yet so far that I want to address today, which I think it'll take us probably 2 weeks to address, is the question of, okay, once you say B'fanei Nechtam, so now what happens? In other words, we said, okay, so that overcomes the problem of Lishma according to Rabba, or overcomes the problem of Mitzuin Lakaimo according to Rava. But let's say the Baal comes and then is Ma'arer, or the husband comes and says, I didn't divorce her. Or the Baal comes along and says, right, so again, the husband sent a get from Medina Tayyam. Let's just take the Medina Tayyam case for a moment. The Baal comes, right? He sends a get, the witness comes, he says, B'fanei Nechtam, we've overcome Lishma, we've overcome Mitzuin Lakaimo. And then the Baal shows up a couple of weeks later and says, I didn't divorce her, or I didn't write a Lishma, or those witnesses weren't good witnesses, or he can say any one number of parameters. So to what extent is B'fanei Nechtam, which is really the only evidence we have that the get was done properly, to what extent is that a discourager? In other words, that's what it meant to discourage the Baal from coming, because then the Baal is going into a confrontation with the witness who came.
There's a get, his name was signed.
Right, there was a get that was signed, right? Or to what extent is the Baal still the ultimate, arbiter of the value of the get? And if he comes along and says it wasn't good, then what happened, right?
Well, that's the end of ourself, right?
Right, no, it's correct. There might be an end of herself, but what is true is that we saw a statement of Reish Lakish at the beginning. We spent the Shiur talking about Reish Lakish's statement and the not just how ambitious it is, but how groundbreaking it is. And that being said, we talked about in the context of Shtar Kinyan and Shtar Raya. We're going to go back to Reish Lakish for a moment, but in the end, the Gemara there doesn't go it doesn't get us into the end zone. It doesn't say, okay, the truth is we don't really need Kiyum Shtara. We don't really need to validate the signatures in the end. In the end, B'fanei Nechtam was enough. In other words, remember Reish Lakish. Well, we're going to read Reish Lakish again, but Reish Lakish, it doesn't say, Reish Lakish is so convinced that a star with 2 signatures is so compelling a piece of evidence that in the end, even if the Baal were to come later and say, or the Baal Dover, for that matter, you remember when we discussed it at the time, Reish Lakish, we said, is it only true in Gittin, or is it also true across all Shtar, right? And is it true Shtar? And then Rab Chaim, is it true in Shtar Raya or only Shtar Kinyan? But all that being said, he doesn't say, the Gemara on Daf Gimel at least doesn't say, and I want to set this up as a conflict between Daf Gimel and Daf Vav, the Gemara never says, and therefore, once you say, right, once Eidim sign on the shtar, that's like as if it was done in Beit Din. That means that should the Baal come along later on and say, hey, no, I didn't mean it, or I didn't do it, or it wasn't me, or it wasn't right, or whatever, it's too late. Nothing that can be done. Good morning, Mike. So we're going to review again for a moment, even though I know I've reviewed 50 times, but it just never hurts to review again. The Gemara itself on Daf Gimel. We're going to contrast that to Daf Vav. We'll talk a little bit about the different parameters of Reish Lakish, and then we're going to have to contend with the Rambam. All that will take us about 15 or 20 minutes. And then today we're going to begin, and next time we'll finish what I called in the WhatsApp the raging debate about the hoax get of 1240, which really has a lot of there's no one who doesn't read these sugyas and read this text, and it's a long text, and it's I said hoax get, I meant the hoax kiddushin. But that's going to be the meat and potatoes of today, and probably next time as well, as we see rabbis in Mantua and Prague and Vienna, all these rabbis getting involved. Basically, anybody in Central Europe gets involved in this kiddushin and this get, and it's probably the third or fourth most famous case of the medieval period. It really takes, gets everybody involved in some ways or another. So just to read the Gemara again, now I'm in Gimel Amud Aleph. The Gemara did the same thing for Rabba, but now it's going to go to Rava. Rava, who says, because the reason you need to say B'fanei Nechtam is because there aren't 18 there. The Rava Damar, the Fisha Einim Mitzuim Lakaimo. Oh, sorry, let me just speak it for you, Danny.
Are we recording?
I'm recording. Thank you. So I can't seem to get the text.
Okay, I can see it. All right.
Yeah, but it just doesn't hurt at me. All right. Well, the Rava Damar, the fish ended with the kaimo libai tray. In other words, if the problem is you don't have witnesses that can validate the signatures, which the assumption is the best way to validate the get would be to validate the signatures in a court. So shouldn't you require two people to come along and say if that's going to kind of substitute for the validation? So midavia kiyum shtar dalma, shouldn't that be just like every kiyum shtarot validating the signatures where you go into court, you say this is the guy's signature, this is the guy, he says yes, that's my signature. The three judges say yes, yes, yes. They issue something called the henpeck. A henpeck is just a sort of validation. It's like a stamp today. It's called a henpeck. So libai trei midavia kiyum shtar dalma. So the Gemara says, yeah, but this is eidach hanem and b'isurin, right? We discussed eidach and b'isurin. Is that right? How seriously do we take ne'eman? Do you need ne'emanut? Is it something else? Right? So the Gemara says, when did we say eidach hanem and b'isurin? Like a woman can be trusted to say she went to the mikvah, or if we have a piece of meat here and we don't know whether it's kosher meat or non-kosher meat, the lo itchazek isura, because there's no cheskat isur. Right? You remember this? This you should remember. If you don't remember, it's good to review it 50 times. These things should be, balpeh by the end of this, year. So there's no cheskat isur, right? You don't know. There was never an assumption that it was non-kosher meat, or an assumption it was a kosher meat, and therefore we can believe one witness when it comes to all the Yoreh dinim. Aval hacha, but in our case, we have this woman itchazek isur de eshet ish, right? This woman was already married. So the question is, to free her, we need more than just eidach hanem. Eidach hanem wouldn't work. And then it says either, right, havi davar shebe'erva or ve'havi davar shebe'erva. In other words, it could be two things. It's either she's also a cheskat isur plus it's a davar shebe'erva, or it's in the cheskat isur because she's a davar shebe'erva. Those are two different gears in the Gemara. Ve'ein davar shebe'erva pacham mishnayim. So you should require two people, right? So I grant you that eidach hanem ben v'isurin beats out kiyum shtaro, but it doesn't beat out cheskat isur plus erva. So the Gemara says, Bidinhu to be kiyum shtar nami lo libai. The truth is, we shouldn't really require in kiyum shtarot either two people. Or the truth is, this has nothing to do with kiyum shtarot. This has nothing to do with validating signatures, or maybe it does. But validating signatures itself doesn't require two people, two witnesses to validate the signature. Kid Reish Lakish, as like Reish Lakish said, I'm a Reish Lakish. It's like deja vu all over again, right? You came in, we're like 9 weeks back, right? So like Reish Lakish says, we're in Gemara Aleph now. Reish Lakish, Eidim achatum al ashtar naasu kemish nechkara edutan bebeitin. And the last time what we did is we tested how far this naasu kemish nechkara edutan bebeitin. It's like they were when someone signs on a star, it's like they gave testimony in the court. V'rabbanan hu deitzrich. We look kiyum shtar is only a mitzvah derabbanan, right? An only requirement midrabbanan to validate signatures. We ask ourselves last time, right, 9 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago, we ask ourselves, is that only in Gittin? Is that in all shtarot? Is that only in Shtari Gittin, Shtari Raya? V'hacha mishum iguna, right, in here, because there's a danger that we might end up leaving this woman as an aguna, akilu be'rabbanan, right? The rabbis were more mekel, right, and therefore they said only require one. Whereas you don't even require kiyum shtaret, or you don't require a high level of kiyum shtaret. Kiyum shtaret is only the Rabbanon. Here they were mekel. They said, okay, you want to do something like kiyum shtaret by saying b'fanei nechtam. Michael, I just want to make sure you understand the difference. Kiyum shtaret is when I go in and I say, this is my signature to three rabbis. The fanei nechtam is I just say in front of the woman. I say, or in front of the court. I go in and I say, this get I'm bringing to this woman. B'fanei nechtam. It's not exactly kiyum shtaret. I'm not saying these are the right signatures. I'm just saying I saw it signed. It's very different, but nonetheless, they say nase kemish nechkara edutan bebeitin. It's only a din d'Rabbanan kiyum shtaret, and they said one is enough because they didn't want to have any aguna problem. Whereas when it comes to the Rabbanans, you can do that. The Gemara says, "Hai kulo chumra." That's really a chumra. If you require two people to come say fanei nechtam, lo atibalu ma'aru pasle. The husband's not going to come and mess it up. But if you only have one person saying fanei nechtam, atibalu ma'aru pasle. The husband's going to come. And he'll come and mess up the get, which sounds like, Jeff, if I come to our question, the husband actually could outflank the b'fanei nechtam. We haven't really discussed this yet, but that's the topic for today. That's why on the Zoom I'm called the complaining husband. What happens if, again, the question is, we started off like this, if the husband, right, I came and said b'fanei nechtam, the woman got the get, and then a week later, the husband, a month later, 3 months later, after the woman gets married, the husband comes along and says, no, that wasn't a good get, right? So here it sounds like the husband could do it. So the Gemara says, no. Kevan damar mar b'fanei b'fnei kama noten Allah. How many does he give it in front of her? Since the guy is going to give it in front of the witness who comes and brings it is going to give it in front of two or in front of three. Mikara medak daik velo ate leurue nafshe. Right, the husband would actually be undermining himself, and therefore he's not going to. Both the husband and the witness are not going to basically mess themselves up. But remember, the husband is not going to mess himself up, knowing that their witness is going to be involved in the continuation of the story. And because of that, he'd have to go against those witnesses as well. And because of that, there's no danger of the husband coming. But if I were to read this Gemara very simply, it sounds like in principle the husband could come and pasale, right? In other words, the husband could theoretically beat out the b'fanei nechta b'fanei echta.
If it's a single.
If it's well, in the end, it is a single. In the end, it is a single aid. But the Gemara doesn't address the question: what if the husband does show up? It says the husband won't show up because if they come and note him.
We already had two witnesses that watched him give over the get.
Right. So he's not gonna.
That's what I'm saying. Right. It seems like the Gemara's premise is not so much that he couldn't counter it.
That he wouldn't.
He wouldn't because he already had two witnesses.
Right, and he's not going to mess himself up.
For him to,
right, it would be a high threshold for him to go ahead and go against those witnesses. That being said, it seems there is a possibility that if he wanted to, in other words, if he decides that yes, I want to be Morur Nafshe, right, I could. Or to put it in other terms, if I take it that seriously, then what I'm basically doing is pulling back a little. I'm being Merasin. I'm putting the brakes a little on Reish Lakish. Right? What did Reish Lakish said? Reish Lakish said, it's like they testified in court. So if the husband comes along and complains, but there's two witnesses against him, tough luck, Mr. Husband. Right? You understand? So this is pullback on Reish Lakish. Right? What the Gemara on Daf Gimel doesn't say, or doesn't say clearly enough, which is that the husband absolutely could do it, the Gemara on Daf Vav says explicitly that he can't. Okay? So that kind of sets it up as like a balance. So it's how, and then the question becomes, how can we differentiate between at least the operating assumption of the Gemara and Daf Gimel and the Gemara and Daf Vav? And that's going to be our challenge for today, if we can just differentiate. Okay, the Gemara and Daf Vav Amud Aleph talks about Bavel. Okay, we talked about bringing from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and then last week we talked about bringing from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Molech maybe, or bring within Eretz Yisrael or within Bavel. We said Ole Regalim, and then we talked about Ole Regalim. What about within Bavel? Or Bichlal, is Bavel Chutz La'aretz? That's also a question. Is Bavel Chutz La'aretz for these purposes? Because what's our problem? Lishma or Edim Mitzuyim L'Kaima. What do you mean? Bavel, there's always they had all those scholars. So that's a machloket Rav and Shmuel, right? Who are both Babylonian scholars, right? Remember, Rav makes Yerida, right? In 248, he leaves from here. Rav is a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in Tzipori, right? You've been to the house in Tzipori, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's house? Have you been there? You should be there. You should go there. Everybody should go there. It's a requirement to this class. You have to go to Tzipori. We'll have a field trip, Danny. Okay, we have to go to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. You can go to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi to see where the Mishnah was written. Okay, he lived in Tzipori. He had a student, Rav. Rav ends up going to Bavel in 48. Kiyata Rav, right? That's a big thing. Rav comes to Bavel. Shmuel's already there. Shmuel spent some time in Israel also, but Shmuel basically is Nechutz La'aretz. But they're both Babylonian scholars at this point. Okay, so Rav Itmar Bavel, you can see on that Vav. Rav Amar Eretz Yisrael Gittin. It's like the same as Eretz Yisrael, meaning we can find witnesses, we can write Lekaimo, there's Lishma. Shmuel Amar Nechutz La'aretz. Says the Gemara, Tamar Savar, maybe their argument, Rav and Shmuel's argument, is the same argument as Rava and Rava, excuse me. Right? Why? Tamar Savar, Lefisha and Bekin Lishma. Oh, maybe the issue is Lishma. That would be Rav. And since Vahani, Gemiri, the people in Bavel, they know Lishma, what they know the law less than Eretz Yisrael. So maybe he holds like Rava. And Shmuel, Mar Savar, right? Shmuel would hold the fish enim between the kaimo. In other words, if you bring a get from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, there's no edim, but there's still Ishma, right? Maybe we could go that way. Gemara says, "V'tizbara ha Rabba idle de Rabba." This is the part we didn't do in the Gemara, but the Gemara in the end said that Rabba, the Lishma guy, also agrees with Rabba. Ella, we don't need to go into that right now. That was on Daf Hey. So Ella, so there can't be that was the Machloket Rav and Shmuel. Everybody agrees that you need Edim Mitzuyim Lekaimo. Rab Savar, Kevin Deika, Metifta Mishkach Shchichi, since there's yeshivas in Bavel, they go back and forth, there's learning back and forth, and therefore there's Edim Mitzuyim Lekaimo. Ushmuel Savtar, this is a great line. Metifta Begirsai, I once wanted to write a poem about this line. Metifta Begirsayu Tride. Right? When you have a yeshiva, It's true that people go between the yeshivas, but everybody's interested in their own derech halimud, so they're not interested in passing it on to the other one, right? When you come from YU to the Gush, it's not like you're not interested in talking about YU anymore. So, they're all talking about their own learning, and therefore there's not Edim Mitzuyim Lakaimo because they don't really pay attention to anybody else. Itmar Nami Amar Rav Amar Huna Asinu Atzminu Asinu Atzminu Bavel Keretz Yisrael Gittin Mechiyata Rav LaBavel. Okay, we made ourselves in Bavel like Eretz Yisrael from Gittin from 248, from the year that Rav arrived in Bavel. Okay, so that is a debate, not very important for us right now, except for the following line: Rav Kahana Aitegit. Okay, so Bavel, we're assuming that Bavel is like Eretz Yisrael Gittin. Rav Kahana once brought again. Velo Yadana, this sounds like the Minsk to Pinsk. It starts here on Daf Vav Amud Aleph in whatever. Velo Yadana, he didn't know. Imi Surah Lenarda, Imi Narda L'Surah. When it came from Surah to Narda or from Narda to Surah. We didn't know which city it started in and which city it ended in. Atalakami de Rav, the one who said that Bavel is like Eretz Yisrael. Amar Le, so Rav Kahana brought the get in front of Rav and said, Tzrichana Lamem B'fanei Nechtam or Lo Tzrichana. So we need to say B'fanei Nechtam. We're in Bavel. Bavel is like Eretz Yisrael. In principle, we don't need to do it, but we don't know which one. Amar Le, so Rav answered. So again, you brought a Bavel again in Bavel. In principle, Bavel we're going to treat like Eretz Yisrael. There was a side problem which we didn't know where it was, where it started and where it ended. They asked Rav, you need to say B'fanei Nechtam, and Rav gave back obtuse answer, which you should memorize. This is the one thing you need to know on that Vav Amud Bet in the Gemara. Rav said, you don't need to say B'fanei Nechtam because I think Bavel is like Eretz Yisrael. The Avid Ahanit. But if you did do it, it works. That's a strange sentence, right? You don't have to do it, but if you do it, it works. Right, so I understand why. So the Gemara immediately jumps down and says,
I don't have to wear a shirt, but I happen to wear a blue shirt, so it happens to work. So.
Right. So the Gemara says, "My yavid ahanit." What does it mean that it works? So Jeff, here you'll be very satisfied. Jeff is like feeling really good about this next line. Says the Gemara, "The ati bal ume'arer." Should the husband come along and say this wasn't a good get? Lo shachinan be. Oh, so the Gemara and Daf Gimel didn't say. And maybe even said the opposite, or at least intimated the opposite, that the husband could come in pasale. Here the Gemara says, if you said B'fanei Nechtam, at least in Bavel, that would be enough to preclude the husband coming.
The statement or not having the statement?
No, having the statement. If you say B'fanei Nechtam, without B'fanei Nechtam, the get is still susceptible to the husband's challenge. Once you said B'fanei Nechtam, the husband's challenge completely ineffective. That's why. You don't have to wear the blue shirt, but if you wear the blue shirt, no one can challenge your being a Giants fan.
Think that the rabbis
you understand? No one can challenge you being a Giants fan.
But you would think the rabbis would then say you should always say it, because you don't want to have the husband come and challenge.
You don't have, correct. But no, it would be a good get until such time as the wife would come. Okay? And this is already very fascinating. How could it, in other words, what the Gemara raised, again, it's totally fascinating. But B'fanei Nechtam is strong enough to preclude, right, without Kiyuv Shtar, without validating the signatures, right? B'fanei Nechtam reaches the threshold of validating the signatures, and more than that, validating the signatures, independent of validating the signatures, the get has its own independent life. Right.
The assumption of the Gemara is that had we not said B'fanei Nechtam, the husband would be able to challenge.
Yes, no, for sure.
It'd still be the
No, it would be 6. Apparently, they would have to go do Kiyuv Shtar or something. They would have to figure out if they get as good.
In any case, even if it wasn't a good idea.
Correct. I'm saying this is not. I don't think in the end, because we started off. That's why I wanted to read the whole Gemara, because Bavel is like Eretz Yisrael. So that point becomes moot, in my humble opinion. That's not. And even the Narda, the Surah, the Narda. I don't think that's the central point. I think the point is when you can say B'fanei Nechtam, when you don't need to say B'fanei Nechtam, if you say it, somehow it can. Now again, you can moderate this Gemara. One way to go, maybe this is what you're saying, Jeff, and I just didn't catch it, is you could say this Gemara isn't relevant. Really, B'fanei Nechtam doesn't work to stop the Yura Bal. Really, the Gemara Daf Gimel is the true Gemara. It's just here you don't need to say it. So if you said it, it goes farther. Maybe that's what you're saying. Okay, that could be. But here they're saying that B'fanei Nechtam, again, it could be that, but it could be B'fanei Nechtam, even when you need to say it, could somehow, so you could do, again, just to make it clear, we have one Gemara that says, seemingly the husband's complaint could stop it. We have one Gemara that says the husband's complaint can't stop it. one suggestion that's emerging from Jeff's words, if Jeff didn't say it, or maybe I just put it into Jeff's words now, is that, yeah, sure, if you need to say it, right, then that shows that the get is really underminable. So saying it gets you to a certain place, but if the husband comes, then you can still challenge it. But this get, independent of the get is already worthy. So therefore, that just takes you a step more. It takes you to beat the ball. It could be. I'm not saying no, but we'll see some other explanations. What I do want to say, taking a step back for a moment, is that if you say that right, we ignore the husband completely, then that gives a lot more credibility to Reish Lakish's statement. Right? Whereas Reish Lakish all of a sudden becomes the gold standard. You have a star that's written, somehow that creates virtual edut. You understand what I mean by virtual edut? No one ever questioned the edim. Right? The edim came and signed the star in your living room, and that's the equivalent of having gone to the court and having a drisha v'chakira and having, making sure that the two of you saw everything in the same way and sitting in the waiting room for an hour. And here you just came and told us you both signed the star, and that has the same validity. Right? That's what Reish Lakish says. It's virtual. It's virtual. Right? And that would play itself out. And this Gemara would seemingly take Reish Lakish a lot more seriously. Right? Right? In other words, I'm making an assumption here. Let me make it clear. I'm making an assumption that the Fanei Nechtam basically just comes to bolster that there's a star, but it's the star that's really working. It's not the Fanei Nechtam that's really working. It's the star that's really functioning.
Question: what is the husband allowed to counter? At one point, and kind of what circumstances?
Right. At what point?
Right. But the second one makes it sound like he would normally always be able to, just because now we have the Fanei Nechtam.
Precludes his right. Correct. But again, I would say that has to do with because the star is powerful enough to be able to do that.
In the case we're starting with Reish Lakish didn't say anything about Fanei Nechtam.
Correct. He said it independently of Fanei Nechtam. Correct. Well, they said it's only D'Rabbanan. It's only D'Rabbanan. The rabbis required it D'Rabbanan, but it's not really so significant. Or it's the Fanei Nechtam is D'Rabbanan. That's the way I read the Gemara in Daf Vav. You can tell me it's different, but I read the Gemara. They have a star. The star is the Doraita implement tool, the kli, right? That gets you as far as you need to get. The husband could complain, and maybe D'Rabbanan would take him seriously, but Fanei Nechtam attacks that D'Rabbanan, okay, and says not necessarily. Just to be clear for a moment, I'm going to take it aside here for a moment, just to show you that some of the Rishonim were not so comfortable with Reish Lakish. Like Reish Lakish, they pulled him back a little. They weren't so comfortable with Reish Lakish. Like, if you take Reish Lakish very seriously, you know what? I'll show it to you in the Tosfot. But the Tosfot in Ketubah, it says this very great line, right? Forget about what his answer is, but Tosfot basically says this fabulous thing that shows you that they're totally uncomfortable. I think we might have read this before. I don't remember, so maybe someone will remind me. But the Gemara there is talking about Elu ne'emanim. It's a Mishnah. Elu ne'emanim la'id begodlan masher abba katnutan. In other words, theoretically, anybody under bar mitzvah can't testify. What if you were under bar mitzvah and you saw a murder, or you saw a couple get married, and then now you're over bar mitzvah? Can you do that, right? So zek tav yado shel abba. So okay, murder maybe not, but zek tav yado shel abba. You can say this is my father's handwriting. Zek tav yado shel rabbi. Zek tav yado shel achi. Right? You can say this is my brother's handwriting, my Rebbe's handwriting. I remember I was at a wedding when I was a kid. Right? Or that would end up making the woman married. You understand? Even though you weren't old enough to witness it.
But is there a difference? One's the time that it happened, the other is now.
No, where do you see time? Oh,
a wedding and a murder happens at a certain point. A signature, you can say, as of right now, I see it for the first time, and I recognize it.
How do you recognize it? If you didn't see, you say, I recognize it because I saw my father. No, he's saying, I recognize it because I saw it when I was younger.
I saw him writing this particular.
No. I just recognized the signature from when I was a kid. No, but his only testimony, this is my father's handwriting, is because he noticed it when he was younger. Right. Okay. The Gemara gives other examples. Ad kan einu ba'im b'Shabbat, right? This is where the tchum was, etc. Then the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna brei Rav Yoshua v'hu sheyesh gadol imo. The only time you're believed is if there's someone older with you who can testify along with you. V'tzricha yesh min aviv, and what do you know of these cases? Yesh min aviv mishum d'shchiach gabei. Your father's signature, that of course you recognize because you're always with your father. Aval Rabbo, you see him in school. Maybe you saw his handwriting on the Nowadays they wouldn't be able to because there's no chalkboards anymore. But okay. In other words, you're afraid of your rebbe, right? Aval aviv, maybe you're not afraid, so you'll just say, "Oh yeah, that was my father's." The father and the rebbe, aviv the shliach gabei, aviv rabbim dit leimte. Aval achiv, the let loha veloha, as younger brothers, right? This is a strong statement. You're not afraid of your older brother, right? Emalo kamash malan. Kamash malan. What's the kamash malan? Kevan de kiyum shtarad midrabanan. Since kiyum shtarad is only midrabanan, himnu rabbanan b'drabanan. The rabbis believed you, since there's really no need to verify signatures on a doraita level. The shtar, right? This sounds like Reish Lakish, right? It sounds like an earlier version of Reish Lakish, right? That kiyum shtar is only the rabbanan. There's no real need to verify signatures, right? Says Tosfot there, right? Tema says kiyum shtar is only the rabbanan. Right. This is where Tosfot. This is like the text classic is, right? The look, right? The Logos classic is where Tosfot says, "Put on the brakes. We can't have a star just like kiyum shtar is only the rabbanan, right? We're verifying signatures only the rabbanan. The star has its own life. Reish Lakish is right, right? It's kamisha nechra done bebeitin." Says Tosfot, "Kevin the midoraita afilu ein adam shiakiru chatimat edim ashtar kasher." If you're going to tell me that even if there are no witnesses who can testify to the star is kasher. So im kain. Says Tosfot, you don't need armed robbery anymore. All you need is a pen, right? This is a good example of the pen is more powerful than the sword. Just get two people, make up a signature, make up a star, and right, go walk in under the marching band of Reish Lakish's marching band, and you're good to go. Right, midor, you can collect.
I just bought this house.
Right, exactly. Exactly, you can do it right now. Right. So Tosfot says, "Oh yeah, kiyum shtar isn't really derabanan, right? Kiyum shtar hachamari da ikal member kevan shalov mode shekatvo v'toen shu parua because ever right then the move shtar shekatvo tzarich lekaimo high kiyum havi vade midurabanan." So says Tosfot, "Oh, I didn't tell you the case right here. What happened here? It's the kid comes along and says that's my father's signature, but the love, right? Anyways, what happened again? There's a signature, there's a star that says Jeff owes Seth $100, right? And it's signed by me. And my little kid comes along and says, I remember when I finally that was my signature. Jeff acknowledges that was a star. Whereas it's not like a regular case where I'm claiming money out of nowhere. He acknowledges there was a star. He just says he paid it back already. Okay? If that's it, there's already, I would just say grounds. There's already grounds for a case. Then kiyum shtar only becomes derabanan. Because Jeff has already validated the star. Or to put it in other terms, Tosfos moderates the whole case. He says, no, of course we couldn't accept Reish Lakish's din completely. That would create anarchy, right? You understand? It would create, I don't know, anarchy is the right word.
Why would I need any validation of a star if both parties
agree? No, because Jeff says he paid it back.
Yeah, but he still agrees that the star existed.
No, but the whole point now is that do I owe the money or not owe the money?
Right. So then the question becomes, once Jeff acknowledges that, but I'm still holding the star, right? So then I want to validate the star. To say, in other words, I want to try to prove as much evidence as possible. Then it only becomes derabanan. I think you're right, Michael, in principle, that in the end I could probably make a claim even if I didn't have the star. Because if you acknowledge that there was a loan, you just say you paid it back. So I say, then why didn't you take back your star? That's why. Well, I say, why didn't you take back your star? So then Jeff says, the star's not a valid star. And then I bring my son and I say, oh, yes, it is. Right, that's what happened. Right, that's the Re's answer. But again, what's important to me is not the way the Re answers it. What's more important to me is the Re's question, which shows that the Re is very, very uncomfortable with this whole kiyum star being derabanan. Okay? So either way, we have a Gemara on Daf Vav that says, we have a Gemara in Ketubah that says kiyum star is derabanan. We have a Gemara, our Gemara as well, on Daf Vav that says, you don't really need kiyum star, right? Or it's in principle, b'fanei should be good enough to preclude the Baals coming to complain. Which once the star is in play, then the star is in play, and there's very little you can do. We have a Gemara in Daf Gimel that maybe isn't good enough to overcome the Baal, but and then we have to address the issue of whether kiyum star is derabanan or they're taking a stronger position. The problem with all this, until now, we have a pretty good model. The star is really strong, right? Makes it even stronger to the extent that it precludes the Baal. The Gemara in Daf Vav is correct. I would fit into this Gemara here, notwithstanding the Tosfot. The problem is the Rambam. Okay? And this is where all hell breaks loose. Okay? And this is really kind of a unique sheet of the Rambam, even though it appears in the Rif earlier, but the Rambam kind of takes it a step further. And then there's at least three ways to read this Rambam, but which we'll talk about very quickly. You can identify either you take it seriously, or you moderate it, or you limit it. Okay? So what do I mean? In other words, you moderate it to a certain case, you neutralize it by saying it's only talking about a certain case, or you limit it to the world of Gittin. Says the Rambam, if a man gives a get, and let's say he gives a get with a fananechtam, and right, he goes, it's sent it from overseas to Israel, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. I never divorced her. The get shuvala mizuyafu. The get that was brought to her, it's a fake, it's a forgery. Says the Rambam, yitkayem b'chotamav. Oh well, so much for everything we've learned today, right? You have to validate the signatures. What do you mean? Kiyum shtar only rabbanon. Gets worse. Ve'im lo nitkayem v'lo nodu edav. If you can't validate it, you can't identify the signatories at all, the signatories. Teitzei, you ready? It's not going to make you happy. V'avlad mamzer sharei ina megureshet. You have a get that the husband, that you can't validate the signatures with, even if you said forget it. Right? And again, what's the significance of Vlad Mamzer? Kiyum shtar can't possibly be Durabanan. Right? In other words, it can't be Durabanan. I want to make sure you understand that statement, because if you don't understand the statement, we can't move on. If Kiyum shtar was only Durabanan, but the get, if Rish Lakish was right, that the get has its own validity, right? Notwithstanding the Tosfot that says that everybody can do anything, right? Everybody can do what they want. If Rish Lakish was right that it's only Doraita, then there's no way you could make the Vlad a Mamzer. Right? You understand how the Vlad is a Mamzer? In other words, he gave the get. The get is in her hands. He said, then the husband comes along. He said, right? Now we're saying the Gemara on Davav. The Rambam paskins, if the husband comes along and says that's not a good get and we cannot validate the signatures, then should that woman go and get remarried to somebody else based on the get? Based on Rish Lakish. Based on Kiyum shtar only being the Rabban. The Rambam says the get is not a get, and the child is a mamzer.
Because the problem is they can't validate the signatures. Rish Lakish's whole point was that once you validate the signatures, has the strength of being.
No. Rish Lakish is independent of validation. Edim achatumim ala shtar kemish nechkara idutan bebeitin. Who says you have to validate the signatures? You have a shtar that's a shtar. That's exactly what Tosfot says. Tosfot says.
But if the stars are contested.
Let me just make sure Jeff understands. Rish Lakish never talked about validating the signatures.
How do you know that?
That's what Tosfot says. Tosfot says so everybody can just sign a shtar, right? The moment you have a shtar. Rabbi Rosenzweig, by the way, said it. I thought this myself also, but he said it explicitly. He said if we take the radical version of Rish Lakish, which is really the normal version of Rish Lakish. So in the first glance, it's a very ambitious project, right? To say, oh, that's true. And he said, now we're saying Tosfos' point, maybe that's just the price you have to pay. You want the world of contracts to work, right? This is the most important statement in all of contracts. You want the world of contracts to work, you have to be willing to say that it works. The contracts just have a validity of their own. So yes, maybe we'll try to validate the signatures, or maybe we'll validate the signatures if the guy comes in. But if they don't, you have to just trust contracts, because otherwise, how can you walk into, right? Seriously, anyway, it's just in our world. It's not the same thing because they're not two Eidim. But how can you walk into a store and pay with a check? It's the whole world of right. So yes, it's just an arbitrage game or an insurance company game, right? That yes, we know 5% of the checks will be invalid, but that's a price we're willing to pay because otherwise we can't have a functional economy. That's based on contract. Okay, how's that?
So, let me understand, Rabbi. The document has only the person who said the Lefanei Nechtam authenticating it.
It's signed by two witnesses, Danny.
It's signed by two. Well, it's signed by two people.
It's signed by two people.
And the only person who asserts that those guys were kosher Eidim, because we don't know who they are even, is the one guy we have in front of us.
Correct.
And we have the actual.
And that's only because it's D'Rabbanan.
No.
Danny, it's only because Kiyum Shtar is only D'Rabbanan. And the rabbi said we can trust one guy to say that. And as soon as he said but the bottom line is, how does that create a blocking How does that block the Baal from coming along and be Ma'ar after at least the Baal Davar? And what's the answer? The answer is, once the shtar is in play, the Baal really can't do anything. Right? Until the Rambam, who comes along and says, not only can the Baal do something, but the Baal actually beats out, right? The Baal actually undermines the shtar.
Right.
He undermines the shtar. The Rambam is not willing to play Tosas's game. He's not willing to play Rish Lakish for sure. Right? At least in this case. Again, I want to read it again because it's very powerful. Okay. So how do you address this Rambam? How does the Rambam deal with the Gemara in Daf Vav? That says, right? So either we can moderate, we can just push off the Gemara in Daf Vav in some way. Right? The Lechem Mishnah asked that question exactly. It's not me. But again, I want to read the Rambam again, just so you understand. The Rambam is in clear distinction to the Tosma. Ba'abal, v'yer erev, Amar lo gerashni me'olam, v'getchu vala mezuyafu, yitkayem b'chotamav. You have to do kiyum shtara. V'im lo nitkayem, kiyum shtara is only the Rabbanan. Okay, so until this point, I could have lived, right? Then he says, v'im lo nitkayem v'lo nodu edav klal, teitzei v'avlad mamzer, sharei ina megureshet. Okay? Then he talks about something else, that maybe in a different context, why he puts this in the same halacha about Avad Aged, there is a Safek Meguresh, if the get gets lost, and she Safek, V'vir Nashim Shechas Kadan Shen Snuot, Zo Einan Ne'emanot Lavi Get Meretz Yisrael. This is a very famous thing. If you have two women who hate each other, they're not believed to bring a get from Meretz Yisrael. Shema Mezuyafu V'titkaven Lekalkel Ota Kedei Shetinaseh V'te'aser Al Ba'aleh. Right, she might have made it, right, you have two women who are, right, the Montagues and the Capulet, so if Mrs. Montague brings a get to Mrs. Capulet, and says, when you're divorced, maybe she's just trying to screw up Mrs. Capulet. And because of that, we don't trust her. Because she actually has the capacity to totally run her life. Right?
In general, can a woman be the maybe of the get and save it? I know.
Yes, I think so.
So it's not.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Right. Right. I mean, the Rambam here seems to intimate that explicitly. Okay. How would you moderate this Rambam? What's a way, first of all, to say the Rambam? You can't take the Rambam seriously. I kind of underlined one line, so that kind of tells you that I'm focusing on that line, right?
As if the witnesses aren't there to.
No, well, the witnesses are clean, right? Whereas one might be able to differentiate, and this is what the tact of the Netivot HaMishpat. He says there's something unique about this Rambam. Rambam adds 3 words that aren't necessarily obvious to you. The Rambam says, Im lo nitkayem, if you didn't validate the signature. And then he adds 3 words, which you don't need to say. V'lo nodu edav. Klal, 4 words. Teitzei v'avlad mamzer. The Rambam might differentiate, I don't know what you think about this distinction, between if we kind of generally have a sense of who these witnesses are, but we just can't find them to validate their signatures, then the get would be fine. It's certainly a vine all right. But if we never heard of them before, then right, no one's ever heard of these people before.
We don't know who they are.
Right, we don't know who they are. We never heard their names before. Whereas the get gets to Eretz Yisrael, and no one's ever heard of these guys before. Anybody know them? No one's ever heard of them? That's already a different thing. Or it's the get it. Or we could have 2 different types of. Again, this wouldn't be the same thing as those.
No, because it's hard.
Right. There's a good basis.
The reason why we say is because they didn't know according to Rabbah, they didn't know who the witnesses were.
But there are no witnesses. There are not enough people to be the thing. No, but again, then it was.
We didn't have the Yamos. We didn't know. According to one of the things, we didn't know who the witnesses were.
Right. No. There are no people to Mitzuyim L'kaima. But the Tiva wouldn't say that. In the Rambam, he wouldn't say that. He says, even if you say V'fanei it's still not enough if lo nodu edim klal.
We don't have any evidence in this case. I think the Rambam's
we're
saying
differentiating between someone who signs George Washington and someone who signs, I don't know. Right. John Doe.
Right. So if the Basin has no idea who these purported Eidim were, then the Basin, even if they believe the person who brings the get, they have no reason to be certain that the Eidim are kosher, let's say.
No, but you can't go that far because we said, again, you guys just don't like this issue of shtar. The shtar has its own life. We're just not comfortable with it.
We have to be some presumption that the shtar.
Right. We have to have a presumption that the shtar is kosher. But the
Who are we
Rambam
relying
says
upon?
if we never heard of the Eidim at all, then already that presumption falls away. Or to put it in other terms, the Rambam in Perek Zayin Halacha Bet is not talking about a normal case. He's talking about a very, very outlying case where we never heard of the Eidim at all. And then
it's an obscure document.
And then already when the husband comes and says it was a forgery, I would even say as far as, even though I don't think the Netivot says this, but he would say what? That what's my best proof that it was Mezuyaf? Who the hell are these guys? Right? No one's ever heard of them.
Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse.
Right, exactly. Well, Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse, everybody know.
No,
Right. So that's one way to go in the Rambam. It's basically that's what I call, right? We've neutralized the Rambam. We've totally pushed it on the periphery. But Einachinami, if Edim came along and said Fananachtam, there's no way you get to a place of the Vlad Mamzer. You couldn't get there. Right? It would be ridiculous. Okay, that's one way to go. Before we get to the Lechem Mishnah. Another way to go is the Rav's way to go. Okay. I deliberated for a while about whether to bring the Rav's proofs for this. I decided in the end not to because I don't want to get us too far off track. But the Rav said, really, we can accept Reish Lakish generally, that Shtar have their own validity. We can accept the Kiyum Shtaris is only to Rabbanan, and yet we can still invalidate this get because there's something else at play, which is the husband. He said, what's unique about this is not that we don't know who Edim are. What's unique about this case is that the husband comes along and is ma'arer. And Kol Zman, right? I'm not exactly clear what the end point is, but if the husband comes along, he still has a role in the get until I'm not sure when. I'm not sure when. I'm not sure when, but he still has a role. The Rav has an interesting proof for this. There's a Gemara that says that raises the question. Just very quickly, the Gemara raises the question. Okay, we know. Let's say we know a get was written Lishma, and then the husband comes along and said, "I don't want it to be given to this woman." The husband has a few wives. Says, "I want it to be given to somebody else. I have two wives with the same name. I want it to be given to another woman." It was written for woman A, right? Yaakov's married to Leah, to two Leahs. And it was written for Leah number one, and he says, I want it to be given to Leah number two. Right? So
from the same city.
What?
From the same city.
From the same city. Okay? So the Gemara says it can't be given to Leah number one, and it can't be given to Leah number two. So it can't be given to Leah number two, I get. Why can't it be given to Leah number one?
Because he changed his mind.
So the Rav says, you see that he can control the Lishma after it was written. It all of a sudden becomes no Lishma anymore. Right? That's very interesting. Okay? I can show you the sources, but for now that's good enough. Okay? I'm oversimplifying a little, but that's the point. So the Rav said, Gittin is a unique din that the husband, the flow, right? The husband has to be involved the whole way, and Lishma keeps on going. So the Rav said the same thing here. I'm not sure where the end point is. I'm not sure if she already got it and it was delivered and etc. But let's say it's still in court, right?
But she couldn't have gotten married and had a baby.
That's a good point.
So in love with herself. According to the Rav,
right?
Somebody 20 years later comes and says, "You know what? That get that I
get you vala." No, it's already here. You're right. It's already given to her. Right. At what point?
At least 3 months after.
Right. It's months after. Right. And it's already given to her. Right. At what point are we going to say? Right. Again, that's what he said. That's his reading of this Rambam. Okay. Again, if you take that, again. So what's unique about this? I agree. Like I said, you can hear my hesitation to be because I don't know where the end point is. But until she dies, until the Edim are mitkayim, I don't know what. But there's a discouraging, right? There's a reason not to do this. The bottom line is that so there's two ways to read this. Okay, neither one of the simple reading. One is the Tivot's way, right? Which is that there's a unique case of Lono Dalo Abal. The second one is this unique case in Gittin. But really, Kiyum Shtar is really the Rabbanos. We have to maintain the integrity of Reish Lakish. Otherwise, we have no contract law, right? And we're in trouble. The Lechem Mishnah, I'm not giving up on starting the where's everyone today in the Mordechai. I'm not giving up on that, so I'm just going to go this through quickly. The Lechem Mishnah does ask the question about us, about our Gemara, right here on the place, right? And he says, he quotes from our Gemara, Dafka the Gemara and Daf Gimel. Where it's the Gemara says, wait, you can only be one to say again. He quotes from Daf Bet, but that was just on Rabbah. We read the one on Rabbah, and we said, it's only Kiyum Shtar is only the Rabbanan. If the husband comes, then and we believe one person because of Edechanim and Bisurin. Hakevin ha'itzuchu Rabbanan lemir fanachtavu kiechet deloleti bal ma'arer v'larer im ken kishiyavo bal v'yarer lamali ein yiror. He says, This goes right in the face of the Gemara. The Gemara says if the husband comes in his ma'arer, we won't believe him. Again, he's not quoting the whole Gemara because the end of the Gemara said that's not the case. What did we say in our Gemara? We believe him because it's really Kiyum Shtar is only the Rabbanon. Here the Ram seems to indicate the Kiyum Shtar is right? Right? Then he quotes the end of the Gemara. Maybe he says the end of the Gemara retracts. Right? Kulo Chumru, whatever. Okay, he asked the question, right? His answer is a little. I actually don't remember his answer right now. So I think. Oh, he doesn't give an answer. Forgive me. He doesn't give an answer. He says this flies. He starts off and says this flies in the face of the Gemara Daf Gimel. Then he says maybe the end of the Gemara Daf Gimel retracts, but certainly the Gemara Daf Vav this would cause a problem. So the Lechem Mishnah already asked that question. Okay, so it turns out this machlok. Before I try to answer the Rambam, I don't even know if we'll be able to answer the Rambam. But this whole thing really is a debate not only in the 70s or 80s when the Rambam writes the Mishnah Torah, but it actually becomes a cause célèbre. Really, Rabbi Herzog said this great line. He said this story becomes, it begins in the New York Post and it moves to the New York Times. I thought that was a fabulous line. Okay, it's a fabulous line about how this story begins. And this is not all the text, and this is like a 5-page thing. Next, and it has some interesting historical dimensions to it because we're going to see. This is totally amazing. That's what we're going to spend that sometime next time. We're going to see that when the Shulchan Aruch gets this text, he doesn't know that there was a debate in the 1200s about it. He just knows one side of the debate, and therefore he paskins like that side. And then the Shach, who's living in the 17th century, says, had the Shulchan Aruch known that there was a debate about this thing, had he had the text from then, he would have changed his mind, which is like an amazing thing. How did the Shulchan Aruch? He knew there was a debate, but he only knew the debate from like a 15th century text. And the Shach says, yeah, but that 15th century text was quoting a 13th century text. And had the Shulchan Aruch known that, he would have changed his mind, which is quite amazing. Okay, what's the story? So the truth is, the story we know from the Mordechai, which is just a compilation. The Mordechai was like a 13th century rabbi, late 13th century, but he is an anthologizer, right? In the back of the Gemara, you have the Haggadah Mordechai in the back here, and he starts telling the story. This is the last text in Kiddushin. It's the last page of Kiddushin in the Mordechai, the last one. Remez is just, they used to that was like their number of whatever. Okay, so here's the story, which we only get half the story here. In the Or Zarua, who's living in Vienna, again, this story all happens in Vienna, but you'll see it goes to Padua and all these places in Prague, but the Mordechai is not living in Vienna, but he's anthologizing from a text that he knows from Vienna, and the story happens in 1239 in Vienna. Okay? Oh, so what I wanted to say, I forgot what I was going to. The Mordechai doesn't have the full story. When we get to the response of the Or Zarua, we're going to hear the full story. So Masaya b'shnei bnei Adam. Shayu Soni and Zed, like the Rambam, right? Not two women hate each other, but two men hate each other. V'alach echad, one of them went, so we'll call them Reuven and Shimon for now. V'hishchid artila echad. Artila is just artila literally means without clothes. It's someone who's very devious. A deviant, birion, that's not the right word, like a mobster, okay? He hired a mobster. Shiotzi laz al bito shel chavero. Okay? He said, go accuse the daughter of we'll call them the Montagues and the Capulets. So he said, go accuse the son of Capulet, Romeo, of something, okay? I don't remember who's who. Romeo the Capulet and the Montague, I don't remember. Okay. So, okay, so what did he do? Go accuse him, and he actually gives him the plot. He tells the mobster what subterfuge or intrigue to create around the daughter of his enemy. Okay, what's the intrigue? Tell him shikitsha. Okay, go accuse the daughter of so and so that she got married. I know this sounds like we're reading some tshuva from the 20th century, and it's like not part of a Gemara, but this is like basic. Okay, and when you study this, the Gemara Daf Vav, you have to study this text. There's no way to avoid it. Okay, v'hiskir edim sheidu shikitshu. So this mobster, right, Don Corleone, he hires two witnesses to say that she's married. And you understand how they're going to totally mess her up, right? The katvu, here's the part that's important for you, Michael. Katvu shtar befanenu. Katvu shtar, sorry. Befanenu chatume mata, in front of us, the people who signed below. Kidesh ploni et bat ploni. Okay? Vayak oto shtar mekuyam behenpek. Gimel dayanim. There were three dayanim who gave it a henpek. A henpek is just a stempel that it was a valid shtar. In other words, the mobster had the whole marechet in place. He got the witnesses, he got a shtar, and he had the dayanim. You got it?
Judges were in his pocket.
Okay. Okay, now we get to what was wrong with it. One of the dayanim was a relative of the girl. And then what happened? One of the dayanim came, they felt guilty, Yom Kippur came, they felt really guilty that they had accused this woman of being married, right? And so what did they do? One of the dayanim was a karov, and one of the edim would sign, right? Hachatum al henpek. One second, I'm sorry. Maybe it wasn't one of the edim. I got it wrong here.
One of the judges and one of the signatories.
No, one of the signatures on the henpek. That was on the stamp.
Henpek or the judges.
Right.
It's two judges.
I think they're right. Right. Bakarov echad min hachatum al henpek. Ve'idu b'fnei beit din. They got another beit din together. Sha'edim b'shtar hakidushin heidu al ktav yadam. Ve'agimel lo ba'al beit din la'id al kacha. So two of them came. It's like what happened here exactly? Ve'idu b'fnei beit din sha'edim b'shtar hakidushin. But it was a shtar kiddushin, not a get, right? It was a shtar kiddushin. Heidu al ktav yadam. In other words, they didn't sign it in front of us. How do you usually validate a shtar? Let's just be clear. Michael, if you and Jeff signed on a shtar, so Dov and I come and say those are their signatures.
Right.
You can't come along and testify about your own signature. I mean, I guess you could, but that's not what happened here. They say they did it about themselves. So, in other words, if we have reason to question you, so we have reason to question whether you're telling the truth at all, right? So you have to bring it some other way, right? The third dayan didn't come. The people who came and testified at the time of the henpek came along about the witnesses themselves. They say we never signed. The bottom line is they claim it was a hoax. The witnesses who signed the shtar kiddushin claim it was a hoax. In other words, remember, the mobster hired someone to say, so-and-so, we'll get their names in the next story. Because so-and-so married this girl. There were two witnesses signing it, and the witnesses in the henpek. So the witnesses in the henpek said the henpek wasn't done validly. The witnesses on the shtar said, we never signed the shtar. You understand? And then the husband came along and said, I never married her. Right? Okay, so now you understand where we're going? Because Michael, you wanted to argue Reish Lakish is Reish Lakish is Reish Lakish, right? You have a shtar, it's signed by two witnesses, it has its own life, it's virtual edus. I could care less if everybody in the party says that it's not a good get, not a good kedushin. You take Reish Lakish seriously, take it all the way.
Except
Everybody says, right? Everybody in the Sharsheret says some of them were relatives, some of them were friends. The guy himself says, I didn't marry her.
Completely excavated the foundations of this get.
It's not again. It's not again. It's a shtar kiddushin.
Shtar Kedushin.
Right.
Shtar Kedushin, right.
So,
but does Reish Lakish say there's a presumption that it's valid or that it is valid?
no, that's a question. But again, it has its own life. So are you willing to pay that price? That's the question I asked you before. Are you willing to pay the price of a check, right? In other words, you're willing to pay the price that we need to get in this case, even though we know it's fraudulent, because
It doesn't matter.
Kiyum Shtar is only Derabanan. So this, you can understand, becomes the talk of the town, right? It gets even better than this story, but let's keep going for it. And what are his proofs going to be? Our sugya, because our sugya is the central sugya that deals with the validation of shtar. You understand? That's where we're going in the next, few days. Again, we're going to read a significant part of this, but it's awesome. Okay, I got to read a little faster because this is taking too long. Okay, let's keep going. The Gambala shtar, the Hainu Hamakadesh, Atzmo Modesh shtar shel kiddushin mezuyafu. V'yishivu harabanim v'yitiru below get. Okay, they said it was a hoax. No get. Harav Rav Avigdor is Avigdor HaKohen. He lives in the early 1200s in Vienna, and he's good friends with all the rabbis there, like or Zarua. Well, again, these are early Rishonim. One of his students, Avigdor Cohen, is the Marami Rothenberg, the famous Marami Rothenberg, who Danny we know about, right? Whose student is the Rush, who gets run out of town, right? The Pidon Shvuim. He's gotten a lot of play, unfortunately, the last few weeks, right? So, Harav Avigdor Ragon Hishiv. Kama dio. So he starts off with a little poem. Kama dio mishtapech v'kumusim mishtabrim. How much ink was spilled and quills broken. La'aroch marachot b'devar halachot. To fight battles about devar halachot. Lavi guvrin v'shtarei bururin. To bring arguments and letters. In other words, that's a very nice poetry. Alodot ha'alma haguna asher bikshu la'agna. Right, on this totally reasonable girl that they wanted to make her into an aguna. So here you see, when you start with this, like how much ink was spilled. And he knows already, this is a big thing. Sodam, right? That's part of that comes from you know where that comes from? That was in Parshat Vayechi about Shimon and Levi. Kalam Sodam, in other words, these guys these rabbis wrote all this stuff. They were wrong. Kiatzur Magen Ba'ada. God wants to defend her, her honor. Right? In other words, this should be an Eidah. In other words, he's writing this is an introduction to his letter in response. Right? This should be her hope. There were only two people by orally and not by written. Now he gets into the halachic argument. ואותם בית העדים החתום העיד לפניהם, לפני השלישי על כתב ידם, אותו שלישי לא בא לבית דין. ואחד מאלו הבית שבאו לפני בית דין שהם חתומים על ההנפק, ואחד מהם קרוב לנערה מחמת אשתו. Okay, so he says this is what the development of the story. One of them is this, invalid, one of them is invalid because of this. נמצא, turns out שאין כאן אלא אחד שאומר שהעדים העידו על כתב ידם. Anyway, it turns out there was only one person who testified that this was their signatories. And even according to him, there wasn't a kiyum shtar with three. Again, the details don't matter so much. To do a validation of a shtar, you need three. Everybody agrees that one of them was a karov. He's not a valid witness. He's not a valid judge. Because of that, the whole handpick went away. There was no validation of the star, etc.
That doesn't deal with our underlying issue.
Oh, now, so again, he says this wasn't a get, this wasn't a star, right, Michael? The shia wasn't a star, okay? Va'afa, right? Because there was no validation of the star. Oh, who that needs validation of a star? After all, kiyum star is only the rabbanim, right? Va'afa gav de bereish Gittin. Right? Comes out Rav Avigdor Cohen and he says, oh, you want to tell me that one of the witnesses, one of the judges was invalid and therefore the shtar was never validated because he was a karov, he was a relative. Afagav de bereish Gittin de mighty la lo ma'iri sha'idim omrim shu ktav yadan. Right? Even though we're not talking about where the Eidim said, oh, this is our signatories, miu ein omrim lo chatamnu, but they didn't say, miu ein omrim lo chatamnu, taletnu kaman, אבל בעובדה דידן שאומרים מעולם לא חתמנו, והם מכחישים אלא אחד מן הדיינים שבא עם קרוב, חתם דברים בטלים. Okay, so he makes a distinction between the Gemara in Gittin and ours. Let's try to figure out what the distinction is. He says, I can make a distinction between our Gemara in Gittin, right? It's not in our Gemara and the story in Vienna. What's the distinction between the stories? He says, let's try to figure it out. Afal Gideresh Gittin Mighty La Lo Mairisha Edim Omrim Shu Ktav Yadan. It's not like the Edim were there in the picture in Gittin, and they say it was our signatures. Miu Ein Omrim Lo Chatamnu. Taletnu kaman. We're not showing Me'olam Lo Chatamnu. Or it's in Gittin. Here, let's start off in the story in Vienna. The story in Vienna, they say, we never signed that document. And the only person who disagrees with it is one of the Dayanim who came with another one that was Karov. That, totally fraudulent. In our story, what happened? It's not like the Eidim come along and say, it's our Ktav Yad, and then someone comes along, and then we're not saying that they said, it's not like the witnesses come along and say, that's not our signatures. They're not here, the witnesses. It's just the husband comes along. Right, so he says, that's it, right? He differentiates between those two cases. When the husband comes along and says, I never gave the get, and when the witnesses come along and say, that's not our signatures. What's the difference between those two things? There's a basic difference between those two things. Then we'll stop.
One's a principal and one of the witnesses.
What do you mean?
What you mean? The husband is the one.
Oh, he's a principal with an AL.
Principal of the action.
No, he's an LE. Right. Sorry. Yes. Right. He's the principal player. The witnesses are also principal players. I see. I thought the distinction was a little different.
Oh.
I thought the distinction was in one, the husband's saying the whole story never happened. When in the case in Vienna, they're saying this isn't the get, this isn't the star, because it's not our signatures. Or it's a star has validity as long as it gets off the ground. They come along and they're pulling the karka underneath the star.
They're saying it's not even.
The husband's not saying it's not a star. He's saying
No, he's saying it's not a.
he's saying it's mizuya, but he's not saying he's saying it's fraudulent, but he's not saying those aren't real signatures.
Yeah, but even,
That's different.
but even the witnesses aren't.
I think what he's saying, not 100% sure. I think what he's saying, we'll start with this next time, but I think what he's saying is, again, we have to figure out exactly how to where the lines are, where the dividing lines are. I think he's saying, I'll give credit to Reish Lakish. If you can have a star, then that star has ultimate power. But if the witnesses themselves say this isn't the star, that's different than the husband saying, I never gave the get. Right? Because that's not a star. He's saying that this might be a star, it's just that the story never happened. Then the star beats his words out. Right? But when they come along and say this isn't the star, then the star doesn't have its own life, independent life. You would see they can pull the carpet under the star, but they can't.
Well, they're witnesses. They're giving testimony that they never were witnesses.
They were never witnesses, exactly. So we don't know what this document is. Exactly. Okay, we'll start with this next time, and then we'll get to the response, and we have some more text, and then we'll get to the shach. I want to show you that one interesting historical piece, but that'll be what our time is next time. Okay, thank you very much. That's good. Good start.
Yeah.